Somebody shared recently a criticism of me that my motivation or tendency or habit pattern these days to advance the idea of free energy, it's not socially acceptable. The criticism is that it's not socially acceptable to discuss it. And that was like 24 hours ago. And then recently, um, I further realized that the reason for that lack of social acceptability is because of the militaristic takeover of society, in which the military influence or element of society has pretty much taken over our society, our American way of life. And I thought back for a minute and I thought, okay, well, how did that happen? Well, I know that it initially happened when Lincoln initiated it, when he created a military dictatorship under his authority in March of 1861, when the 9 congressmen from the southern states left Congress to go home to their states to secede from the Union. There was not a quorum to do business in Congress, but there was still a quorum to decide whether or not to do business in the future, and they decided, the remaining congressmen decided, never to do business again in perpetuity, and that means under the Constitution. Now, that was the second Constitution that we had. Now, we've never had a third. All we've done is modify it or whatever, but we did have a first one because the first capital of our nation was in Philadelphia. And the first president of the United States was not George Washington. He was the first president of the Second Continental Congress under the second Constitution, not the first. We had about 9 years of tenureship of the first Constitution. Anyway, before we moved the nation's capital to Washington, D.C., under the second Constitution. Anyway, we did not have a legitimate government under Lincoln. It was simply a military dictatorship because what he did, so all the congressmen went home to their homes, figuring that the normal thing to do would be to convene a third Continental Congress to draw up a third constitution and elect a new president, administration, and whatnot, and a cabinet, which meant that Lincoln would have been replaced because he had no legitimate government. And that meant that all of the sovereignty or authority no longer was vested in him, but was vested in the state governments at that point. So we reverted to a bunch of states who are now countries, and it's been that way ever since. It has never changed. The only thing that's changed is that the military dictatorship that he initiated has become more influential. And so in a sense, the military dictatorship is its own country, and that country is Washington, D.C. And it has taken over the lives of all of and activities of and endeavors of all of the states that surround it, all of the 50 states. It literally is a dictatorship. Literally, the 50 states are enslaved to the military dictatorship of Washington, D.C. Because after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period, somebody happened to pounce upon the notes from March of 1861 and figured out, oh my God, we have not had a legitimate government all this time, because everybody just assumed that we did. The military didn't know any better when they took orders from Lincoln. They didn't know. I mean, he jailed editors of northern newspapers who were against his promotion of a war. He shut down newspapers, northern newspapers. He did anything he could to make sure we had a war, because he expected it to be a small skirmish that would end quickly. And he became depressed. We all know how famous it was that he was prone to depression. Well, he had a good reason to be depressed, because the war spiraled out of his control. He had generals that were incompetent, and it helped to prolong the war at its initial stages and put off a quick and easy victory. And the thing just went on, and people kept dying and dying, and he got caught up in something that was quite messy, and war usually is. And, well, anyway. So, let's see. So somebody read the minutes, and they figured out we did not have a legitimate government, so they incorporated Washington, D.C., and all of the federal territories under its jurisdiction. And that is the extent of the United States. That's as far as it goes. All of the surrounding 50 states are simply enslaved to this notion that they participate. And you have to do so voluntarily. That's why we're asked, are you a citizen of the United States to work, yada yada, because you shouldn't have to requalify yourself over and over again. It shouldn't have to be necessary. But, that's what we have. And so, but it was never fully endowed. That integration was never fully endowed until World War II, when we had to industrialize the manufacture of military props, shall we say, on a very large scale. We had to turn industry over to the production of military vehicles and armaments and planes and whatnot, tanks. That's when the military became industrialized and became part of commerce. And once it became a part of commerce, it became a part of everything, because commerce pretty much dictates everything nowadays. And probably because of that factor, because before World War II, there was not this motivation behind industry in a kind of unified sense. So it unified industry around a central goal. And so industry was pretty much outside of government. We had we had trade unions, and we had monopolies. We had all these things operating outside of the domain of government until the militarized industry for the purposes of World War II production. And now we have a fully unified industry that is left alone so long as its stance is neutral to our militarized society. But it cannot go against it. And Wikipedia is a perfect example of that, because of my antisocial behavior of promoting free energy. Anything I put on Wikipedia is removed. And anything I put on archive.org is removed. Even my accounts have been removed. So it shows those two are fully controlled by militaristic motivations, shall we say, interests, vested interests. And, certain industries are too, much more so than others. And we're not the only country or group of states who are infected with this militarization of society. Israel is another example. You don't have to go to communist countries to find it, but it's right here at home in the so-called U.S. of A. So, why am I not perturbed by this criticism that I'm being antisocial in my promotion of free energy? Because it's actually a compliment. Life grows, it evolves. That is the name of the creator in Sanskrit, Ishvara. Ish, or I should say E, means progression and evolution, and Shwara means all creatures. And Charlie Lutz would always say that karma is not the first prime directive of Mother Divine or creation. The first prime directive is that all things must grow. And the methodology through which all things must grow is through karma, through action and its response. So if you want to grow, you have to get involved. You have to create some karma. Otherwise, you don't grow. But it's for the purposes of growth that we get involved with karma in the first place. And this prime directive, ensconced as it is, even in the name of the Almighty, Supreme Being, is what matters. The criticism of me being antisocial is actually a compliment, because I am injecting my contribution to the collective consciousness of society. And it doesn't mean that the outcome or the result of my involvement will result in the death of our monetary supply or our ability to be militaristic and continue to be. It may simply do nothing more than wise up the participants, who are actively engaged in our militarized society to take a stronger defense or offense to ensure that we strengthen our militarized society to exclude free speech on the topic of free energy within certain domains that are highly controlled, such as Wikipedia or archive.org. So why is that a bad thing? All things must grow. And there's an old adage that sometimes things have to get worse before they get better, but why call it worse? That's a very narrow point of view that's not even accurate. It's not even accurate. It has nothing to... It's narrow. It doesn't even say enough. And let me tell you why. Charlie Lutz always would talk about the Lipika. The Lipika are the lords of karma. They are the faculty in our consciousness that are there all the time, whether or not we pay attention, and most people do not most of the time, until we die. Most people pay attention when we die because then our senses shut off to the outside world and we are not distracted anymore by the outside world, and now we can pay attention to their judgment, which they continually provide. Now, it's a panel of 9 beings, 8 of which are guys that are hooded. You don't see their faces. And then the 9th person is a woman, and she is always perpetually pregnant. She is never not pregnant. And I guess she does not give birth either. But she speaks. If you want to converse with anybody, she's the only one you can converse with. The other ones, they will dance a merry jig as a positive yes response, or they will remain silent if it's a no response. They won't give any response at all if it's a no. And their yes-no response is in response to the question we would be intending to pose to them, because to suit the purpose of what function they serve in creation, in our existence, in our human consciousness. Our so-called human right to free will and personal responsibility for our actions, unlike the animal kingdom or the angelic kingdom, who do not have personal responsibility for their actions. The animals act according to instinct, and the angels act according to divine plans. So we're the only ones who can upstage our instinct and act contrary to our instinct, or act contrary to our divine purpose, because we are a combination of both angelic and animalistic existential fundamental existences integrated into one being, the human being. We encompass the whole of creation in just one person. We have a lot to grow to learn about that. Anyway, so the question posed to the Lords of Karma is to request permission or request relief from karma. In other words, to be, let's say we have a certain suffering, a pain, and we want to be relieved. They are the ones who are in charge of relieving us of something that we don't want to be burdened with anymore. But why would they say no? And my uncle would have this story in which he would say, well, in order to plant my garden, I want to plant a garden over here, first I have to build a wall. But in order to build a wall, I have to clear the field of stones in order to have them and then assemble the wall from those stones, and then I'll have it was something like that. It was a cascade of events. In order to get to the last one, you had to go through the intermediary stages and start off at the first one. And that's the way it works with the Lords of Karma. If you want to get something done, sometimes it's complicated. It's not simple. And in order to get what you want, you'll be told no, and you won't be told anything else. The hooded guys will simply not respond. Excuse me. So what you have to realize at that point is, well, I'm asking something that is inappropriate to ask. It's It's more complicated than I assumed, and so I have to step back a bit and go back to a prior step and cover that territory. And maybe that's not the right one, and I have to go before that one. Find out, well, okay, what comes before that? I have to keep going backwards until I get to the first step, and then I can proceed forward. Then you can ask for what you want to be relieved of, and they will do so, and you can move forward with that. Now, that's probably the condition we have, is we can't talk about free energy because we have a military that controls society. It controls everything. It controls government. You know, what Lincoln started got out of hand. He thought it would be a small rebellion. He thought he would be in charge. He thought it would end quickly, and then he would offer grace and mercy to the South. And none of that happened. None of the things he expected that he would be able to accomplish occurred. Once he started a war, it got out of his control, and nothing he did, other than freeing the slaves and instituting Thanksgiving as a holiday, pretty much a lot of the things he wanted to do just never got done. Because military took over at that point and took it out of his hands, took control out of his hands. The military dictatorship that he thought he could control was taken out of his hands. And it's never been in any president's hands ever since then. I mean, JFK tried to take control, and look what happened to him. Let's see. So that's the problem we have facing ourselves, is the military dictatorship that we run under. And, think about it. We don't have a solvent economy. It's been riddled with debt since the inception of the Federal Reserve, which is 100 years ago. Since 1920, we have been, the United States Treasury has been bankrupt since 1920. And at the end of every business day, every banker has to tally up all his assets and all his liabilities, and they have to equal out to zero because there is no money in circulation. In fact, we have no laws anymore. Somewhere around 1980 decade or 1990s, I think it was the 1980 decade, 2 laws were quietly removed from our federal laws. One had to do with the definition of money, and the other had to do with the definition of, the dollar. So we no longer have a definition for the dollar, a legal definition, and we no longer have a legal definition for money. They do not exist anymore. So in a bankrupt country in which we export debt, we create credit and sell the credit to foreign countries, mostly China and also India, but mostly China. And then we buy their products to service the interest rate on that credit without paying off the credit. We have a limited lifespan, basically, in which our economy will remain solvent. And this has been known by economists for some time who study the matter, but so what? We haven't gone under yet. Why? Because the military props everything up and makes sure that we don't go belly up anytime soon. And if we do, they've got contingency plans for that, but all the same, that's what maintains society, is not the economy. We don't have an economy that can maintain us. All we have that maintains us is our military dictatorship that we operate underneath. And as a kind of corporation, because everything in government is a corporation, even the definition of the United States of America, one of the definitions is a federal corporation. Anything that's a corporation is a very highly managed enterprise, and the military is no different. And our society underneath of that is also highly organized in its maintenance and management. And if anything does not go well with that, it's excluded. It's not discussed. It's off the table. We don't even talk about it. When something is not allowed to be talked about, you can be sure there is prejudice. When we were not allowed to talk about racial prejudice, we had it maintained. The best way to maintain something is to make sure you don't talk about it. Noam Chomsky has already promoted that idea, so I'm not saying anything new. Mostly I don't say anything new anyway. I just assemble all the stuff together and integrate it and figure it out. how connect the dots. But I don't really come up with anything new. I don't have to. Let's see, what else have I not covered? And that's definitely the way it is with free energy, because I keep saying it's nothing new. It's on a need-to-know basis. If you don't need to know, you're not told it. And so I had to learn it on my own, because you're not going to find it from any books or any video course or any college course. It's just not going to happen. You have to figure it out on your own, or you're else here up the creek without a paddle. And most people are not capable of self-study. They have to be told what to think and what to believe in, and they take it on somebody else's authority. And so those are the people who manage everything. So the military doesn't have to manage, right? They just have to organize. Bureaucrats who manage, who are not smart enough to think things through for themselves and draw their own conclusions. And they have various pressures to prevent that from happening anyway, to discourage them. Various pressures, like maintaining your reputation. If you want to stay engaged and involved and needed and wanted, you better not, you better cross your I's and dot your T's, or else you'll be out of a job or not be hireable. I mean, I'm not hireable. I don't have any job skills. I'm lucky to survive, and even that is usually bare bones from one day to the next anyway. It's ridiculously unstable, or not the most stable condition to be in. Yet I grow because I'm a meditator. I'm a yogi. And that means I get to take anything that happens and look at it in a different way. I can turn it around. And it means innovation. And let me give you a little hint. People think that gold is useless. There's somebody on Quora that complains that I'm giving people bad advice. Well, yeah, duh, you're supposed to eat gold in the form of gold leaf, and it has to be pure 24 karat gold, 100% gold. But it is useful, because in homeopathy it does improve attitude, like depression or not thinking constructively about something. So yeah, you could meditate, you can take gold leaf, you can do all kinds of things to change your perspective and change your life. You don't have to be negative, you don't have to be despondent, you don't have to be or take the position that there are no solutions. There's only one situation that there's no solution to, and that's unforgivable sin. And very few people have that, and very few people have to suffer under that. A person who has to suffer under that fully is a fully enlightened individual. That's the only person who has to suffer from that. Anybody else who has it doesn't have to fully suffer it, and very few people have it anyway. So for every other situation, there is always a solution. Always. We are living in a technological age in which there is a technique for everything. Literally. If you can think of a problem, somebody else can think of its solution. If you can't, somebody else will.